Hey guys, what's up? I'm Noah. This is Analog Resurgence, and today I'm going to be doing a little bit of an intro to the 35mm still film format. This is a roll of 35mm film. 35mm is the most popular and by far widely used film format out there. And it was preferred by both amateurs and professionals alike for decades before digital came along and kind of pushed it aside. At the dawn of photography in the 1800s and into the early 1900s, photography was used in a very different way than we know now. There was large format photography using cameras that were enormous. There was plate photography where materials such as glass was coated with specialized chemicals and then the image was actually shot onto that. And there was medium format photography, which used roll film like 120 and 620. Now, closer to the end of the 1800s, people started to experiment with film in order to capture moving images. And this all basically began with the kinetoscope. Now, the kinetoscope is like a little bit of a projector. It's a large box with an opening at the top. People would look through this small opening, and inside the box, a loop of film was being moved through and projected onto the screen. So they were watching little film loops creating moving images, GIFs. They were watching analog GIFs. And they were using a film size smaller than the normal medium-sized format at the time. And this was one of the very first applications of 35mm film. Now, with a little bit of help from George Eastman and the Eastman Company, film was being cut down to 35mm and perforated along both edges. And these sprocket holes were used to help move the film through the camera. 35mm gained more prominence in the 1910s with the invention of cameras that would move the film horizontally through the camera. These were cameras like the early Leicas and a camera called the Tourist Multiple, which was actually a half-frame camera. Now, over the following decades, 35mm grew in popularity, until around the 1960s when it finally overtook medium format 120 film as the biggest, most popular format of choice for photography in both amateurs and even professionals. 35mm film is, well, 35mm wide, with the standard photographic frame size being 36mm by 24mm and 8 perforations long on the film. Even today, modern digital cameras use the phrase full frame in reference to a camera having a digital sensor that is roughly the same size as a 35mm frame. 35mm cameras come in a variety of types, from point-and-shoot cameras to fully manual SLRs. Now, point-and-shoot cameras will typically have fully automatic features. These cameras will advance the film, focus the image automatically, try and determine the best exposure for the image, and some of them will even automatically detect the ISO of the film that you put in it. In comparison, an SLR usually has fully manual options. SLR actually means single lens reflex, so when you look through the viewfinder, you're actually seeing what's through the lens. Now, these cameras usually have interchangeable lenses. They have shutter speed options, ISO options, different aperture settings on the rings, manual focus, and you have to do all the settings manually. Oh, but who could forget the classic disposable camera? Now, these are entirely plastic cameras and they come with the film already loaded inside, and it's actually already unwound outside of the canister. So as you take the picture, you're winding it back into the canister. Currently, the main types of 35mm film that you can come across are black and white negative, and color reversal, or color slide film as it's usually called. You can find more variety in 35mm film than you can in any other types of film formats that are out there. There are all sorts of companies out there making film right now, including Fuji, Agfa, Kodak, Adox, Kentmere, Ultrafine, Japan Camera Hunter, Cinestill, and that's just to name a few. Most standard photo labs out there are usually able to develop 35mm film really easily for both color negative and black and white negative. In the past, these film negatives would have been used in a darkroom printing process. The negatives would have been projected onto light-sensitive paper, which would have been developed so then you could have had full-size prints for your images that you had taken. But most people using analog formats now want digital versions of their files so that they can share them more easily or edit them with digital programs such as Lightroom or Photoshop. This digitization process of film negatives is usually done using specialized scanning units. Most labs have these, and there's a variety of different ones out there made by companies like Noritsu or Fuji. But you can also scan your film negatives at home utilizing software and flatbed scanners that you can buy that have special film holders to hold your negatives in them. And the other widely available type of film, color slide film, is a little bit of a more specialized type of film. This film will give you positive images back, which means that it's a more specialized chemical process and fewer labs actually do it. In order for a lab to be able to process positive film as a positive, you have to find a lab that does the E6 process. So you can either ask your local photo lab or you can check online for different ones. I personally love slide film and it comes out looking amazing if you shoot it properly, and there's nothing quite like holding it up to the light and looking at those slides that you shot yourself. When you're buying a roll of 35mm film, it will usually come in a box like this. The box will give you all the information of the film, the manufacturer, what type of film it is. But if you don't have the box that came with your film, then the important information is still actually on the metal canister as well. The type of film, the ISO, and the exposure count. Now this format is relatively easy to use, and it comes with the film all rolled up inside this canister with a little piece sticking out at the end that's cut like this to make it easier to load into your cameras. Now if you rotate this centerpiece, the film will actually wind back into the canister, which is typically what you would be doing once you finish shooting a roll in your camera. The number of exposures for your film is actually the number of images that you can physically fit onto that roll of film. 24 exposure rolls of film can fit about 24 images. And of course, 36 exposure rolls will hold more images. And that just means that there are physically longer lengths of film in the canister. Now you might be able to fit a 24th exposure or a 37th exposure onto that roll of film, but you have to be careful because after a certain point you might accidentally start double exposing onto previous images, or you might actually lose one of those extra frames during the processing procedures at the lab. Now most current types of film will have these black and silver segments on the canister, and this is called a DX code. And they're used by certain cameras to automatically detect the ISO of your film. Not all cameras will have the ability to read DX codes though, but I'll do more of an explanation about how DX codes work in the future. 35mm film is the best place to start if you're trying to get into analog formats for the very first time. It's so accessible because of how many types of different film exist for it and how easy it is to find a camera for you to use to shoot the format. And it is also by far the cheapest option for shooting film out there. So if you want to get into analog for the very first time, that's definitely where I would recommend you start. So that's really a rough idea of what 35mm is all about. And in upcoming videos, I'll delve into some more specifics about the format, like black and white negative and color and slide film, and the different types of films out there, and even basic exposure for you guys to start getting into these formats, picking up cameras and just going out and shooting. Thank you guys so much for checking this stuff out and watching, and I really hope that you enjoyed and it answered some of the questions that you might have, or you just learned something new that you didn't know before. And subscribe if you haven't done so already, as I continue to post all sorts of analog content every week about different formats, cameras, and histories on some of these topics. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys soon.